Hello everyone, Grandmaster Dejan Bojkov here with a video of the advance of the pawns against the enemy king. We have typically two situations in which we are attacking the pawns against the enemy king. One situation in which the kings have castled on the opposite sides, and another situation in which the kings have castled on the same side. It's easier to understand the situation in which the kings have castled on the opposite sides, because then the real question and the main question is who is faster. The one who is faster opens the files, reaches the opponent's kings, starts attacking it first, doesn't give him a chance to do the same to your king, and delivers checkmate. We have usually opposite castlings in a lot of Sicilian games, also in the Greenfield, some lines in the Greenfield, some lines in the King's Sea, and actually in pretty many openings. But the game that I chose for you is a very typical one. Two not very famous player, just in town, playing with the white pieces against Mike Clement. It was played in Australia 2011. As far as I know, Justin Tan is a very talented player, but I have no information about his opponent. Anyway, the game that we are about to see was played in a very sharp line of the dragon. So we have a typical dragon position after g6, and then white is following the main line. He simply developed his pieces. He brought the bishop out on c4. That's pretty much the main line. And after rook c8 and knight e5, black is ready to counterattack himself. So first of all, he wants to jump knight to c4, trade this bishop eventually, or that one. And after that, typical idea for black is to sacrifice the exchange on c3 and to break open the position on this side of the board. Usually the advance of his 2 pawns there is quite ineffective. His plan is to try and to violently break the queen side with the exchange sacrifice, while white has a clear plan of advancing his pawns on the king side, and in the process he wants to sacrifice 1 or even 2 of his pawns, sometimes even more, to break open the position of the kings. If we compare this to a real war and real battle, we know that in the real battle it will be the heavy artillery which is going to open the road for the foot soldiers. In chess it is the other way around. The foot soldiers, the pawns, are trying to open the road for the heavy pieces from behind. And the reason is that the heavy pieces are extremely powerful, we know that, but they are helpless playing against their own pawns. So basically these pawns, they are obstructing them. We want to get rid of the pawns, and in the process we want to do as much damage to the opponent's position as we can. If we can get rid of our pawns and at the same time destroy the opponent's king side and weaken him, take away the cover in front of the king, that would be great. So here comes the typical dragon move g4. It's a sacrifice for pawn, but white is already opening the g file for the d1 rook, followed by another typical move h5, which is opening the other file for the next rook, the h rook. He is going to enjoy that one. Okay, black is forced to take it. This is pretty much theory. And now white continues playing just as if nothing had happened. He goes bishop h6. He will be happy to trade as a really very powerful defender on g7 and eventually use the h6 square for his queen. By the way, please note that white is already threatening to sacrifice the exchange on h5, and after this capture the queen can exploit the g5 square and the g file to deliver checkmate after that on g7. Black can never really block with the knight, as white is simply going to take it, making use of the other bishop on the b3 square. That's why he's playing e6, he's covering the g5 square. So white continues with rook d to g1. He says, okay, I open this file, I'm going to use it. My rook is going to profit from that. After queen to f6, he took back on g4. Bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and queen g7 was the best thing that black could think of. He brought the queen to replace the bishop and to defend the king side. That's a great idea, yes, but white's situation remains much more pleasant. He goes back with the queen on d2. Right now he has just 1 pawn down, but he can soon double his rooks on the h file, or he can even further disturb the black pieces, which he did with the move g5. After knight h5, now the only obstacle on the road of the white rooks is that knight on h5. and white is simply replacing it with his own knight. He goes knight c to e2, this knight wants to go after that on g3, on f4, trade the defender on h5, after which white will have a clear plan of doubling his rooks on the freshly opened file and checkmating the opponent on h7. Don't be surprised to learn that all of this has been theory, and only now black did create a novelty with the move rook c5. Previously, the people have played here knight c4 and b5. The position is extremely sharp, and that's quite typical for the dragon. Sometimes the theory starts in move number 30, and even more than that. White went knight to g3, black continued with a5. By the way, here is a typical situation and typical way that the game can continue after knight g3. This defender is no longer there, and white is using the h-file, but he also wants to make good use of the h-file, the best possible use. Right now he is threatening rook to h3, followed by queen f6, trading this queen, and checkmate on h8. Therefore the only defense for black is to go e5, but then knight b5 is strong. The idea being that if the rook captures this one, there'll be bishop takes c4, this bishop is released, and the united efforts of the white pieces are winning the game thanks to this little trick now. Bishop takes to f7 check, that completely destroys the position of the black king. Whenever they take it, we have a check, followed by another check. We are winning the queen, and that's not everything. We are going to deliver checkmate after that. Whenever this rook comes on the h-file, most likely after rook g2 or rook g1, it doesn't really matter, but of course white can simply capture on d7 if he doesn't want to calculate anything and then do the checkmate from h3. That's a typical line. Now after knight b5, one more thing that black can do is to capture with the bishop, but then the bishop is diverted from the d7 square, therefore h3 is no longer defended, and rook h3 is winning the game thanks to the same old idea that I have mentioned previously, queen to f6, followed by the checkmate on h8. And one more line here, if rook e6, defending the f6 square, here we can once more make very good use of the open file, go rook h7, whenever they take it, we take, check on f7, and we take the rook on e6. None of this happened, but it clearly demonstrates how useful the open file was for the white rooks, and why he was striving to break open the files. The game continuation, what happened was also a demonstration of the usage of the open file. After e5, instead of taking on h5, which was also very good for white and was giving him the advantage, he decided to play the spectacular move, knight f5, opens the road for the bishop, and that bishop is helping now white to keep on advancing the pawns and to keep on opening files. After this capture there was knight h5 now, g takes h5, and here comes the idea of the move knight f5. g6 is possible, and it is possible thanks to the support of this bishop. The pawn can no longer take on g6, so therefore black needs to take with the knight, but then queen takes d6 is extremely unpleasant and white creates a bunch of threats. So first obvious one, queen takes c5, a rook, queen takes d7, a bishop, but rook takes g6, not only a knight, but a queen after that, thanks to that same pin, makes black's position completely helpless. He tried bishop e6 in the game. Rook c6 wouldn't help neither. After queen takes d7, the rook on e8 is hanging, and this can be answered simply rook h5. So white is going to win quite prosaically in this case. The main threat being bishop takes f7, and after queen f7, rook h8 check to win the queen. We have seen this motive before, and it's repeating itself here. While bishop e6 was answered, queen takes c5. Now white is attacking with material advantage, and he is finishing the game in a really very nice, beautiful, sweet way. He gives a check on c8, and on queen f8 he takes on e6, making full use of the open files. And he made everything possible thanks to these files. He captured, rook takes g6 check. If the king goes now to h7, rook g5. And this is the result of the sacrifice of the pawns. First the h pawn, then the g pawn, and now the two files, g and the h file, have been opened. Rook takes h5 is unstoppable. White is going to win the queen. There is nothing that black can do but to sacrifice it. As well, he did take the queen after rook g6, king f7, rook f1 check, rook takes f8, and king c1, and black had to throw in the towel. Nothing really strange about everything that we have seen, but remember this one, we are advancing the pawns in order to clear the road for the heavy artillery, the rooks, the queens coming from behind, the bishops, the long-range pieces. Now, another way to advance the pawns, a little bit trickier, a little bit more difficult, at least psychologically, is if the sides have castled on the same side. For that team, I would like to show you the game Galkin against Shumoev that was played in Russia, 2005, two strong Russian grandmasters. The opening this time is the Scheveningen. It started as a Najdorf, but after that it turned into Scheveningen with d6. In the Scheveningen, white is typically developing himself like that, and after knight to c6 and bishop e3, he has usually 2 or 3 plans, grand plans to attack on the king side. One idea is to bring the queen to g3 and to try to attack with pieces. Another idea is to put the bishop on d3 and again to try to attack with pieces by shifting the queen on f3, sometimes on h3. There are also positional ideas of playing on the queen side, but one of the most typical ideas is to start pushing the g pawn and once more clearing the road for his pieces there. But here it's not only about the clearing of space for the heavy pieces. It's slightly different. Okay, let me show you what I mean. After g4, bishop to c8 and g5, the first thing that white achieves is he gets rid of this knight. The knight was a very good defender. It was defending h7. And it was defending g4 and h5 squares. So after the knight steps back and the white bishop steps back, one idea for white is to bring his queen to h5 in the future, or sometimes on h4 too. But h5 is now available because this knight has been removed. Another important thing is that without the knight on f6, black doesn't have his usual counterplay with d5. So far everything is great for white, but there are some unpleasant things for him too. Okay, he played rook d1, and after bishop e7, he started shifting his pieces on the king's side. I forgot to mention that one of the important things about the advance of the pawns is that we are trying not only to clear the road for our pieces, but we are freeing air so that they can maneuver. Now you see, before that the rook couldn't easily go on the king's side, but because we advanced the pawns that far, it is possible to shift it along the third rank and to use it into the attack as well. Incidentally, this appears to be a novelty back in 2005. Before that, people have played exclusively queen to f2, to which black replied with knight a5, seeking for counterplay on the queen side. The knight is going to c4. Black would be very happy to treat the dark squared bishop in this situation. This is something that white doesn't allow, and at the same time he is bringing more and more pieces on the king side. After knight c4, he played bishop c1, and on g6 he is bringing his pieces up there. Bishop g7, and one more advance for pawn on the king side is the move f5. So like I mentioned, we have a lot of good things about the advance of the pawns, but there are some drawbacks as well. To start with, the e5 square has been freed for the black pieces. If there were less pieces on the board, black would be very happy about this. But in this particular situation, these pieces are stepping on each other's toes. And say knight d to e5 here can be answered queen to h4, and after a possible capture on f5, queen takes h7 will give nice attack to white. In this line, if black goes h5, white can simply capture the pawn. There is no bishop f6 move. With the knight on d7, that would be playable for black perhaps, but not here. Then another bad thing eventually for white in this situation is that even though he is attacking, sometimes black can go for counter-attacking. He can capture on f5, then capture on g2, and start counter-attacking himself on this diagonal. In the process, white is weakening himself too. But here it's not really a big deal. White can simply recapture even with the queen. although taking with the king is also fine, and next he can jump with the knight on d5, and he can proceed with his attack. This is going to be okay for him, no worries about it. But still, white has to be careful whenever he's advancing his pawns on the king side. Okay, so far we have seen white achieved a lot on the king side, but there is still many more things to achieve. He can push that pawn even further. And even though at a glance this seems counterintuitive, he is not opening files and he is not really opening the road for his heavy pieces like we have seen it in the previous example, the pawn on f6 is a tremendously strong attacker. Why? Well, first of all, one of the main defensive ideas for black was to play knight f8, and with the bishop covering the dark squares and the knight covering the light squares, he could have built a very nice shield on the king side. But after the move f6, this plan is no longer working. The pawn on e6 itself is a great attacking tool too. It takes away a lot of squares from black, and it traps this king. It doesn't give him a chance to easily escape on the queen side, as it blocks it. It blocks the e7 square, and there are too many pieces on the back rank which are not giving him a chance to escape. One more utility of that pawn is that after bishop h8, this bishop will remain trapped till the end of the game. So here, besides the typical plan of kingside attack, white will have another plan of treating everything and leaving the bad bishop on h8, practically playing with an extra piece on the other side. So grabbing space in this case is good from tactical point of view, but also from strategical point of view. Black will be down a piece. After bishop f8, which was played in the game, now we will see why the pawn is so good on f6. White simply played rook takes h7. Not a simple move, excuse me, it's a very nice move. But this is possible once again thanks to the powerful pawn on f6 that took away so many squares from the black pieces and simply kicked away all the defenders. Well, they have to take it sooner or later, either after knight f6 and king h7, queen h4 check, and then rook d3. But here, black is gaining, checkmated. Rook h3 cannot be stopped, followed by queen to h8. Even if black tries bishop to g7, white is going to ignore that bishop, and he will simply go bishop to g5, followed by rook h3 anyway. So therefore, black took it immediately. But then we have queen h4 check, rook d3, followed by rook h3. And again, the fact that we took that much space made this sacrifice possible. There are no defenders, and rook h3 is inevitable. Only move for black to stay into the game is bishop g7, to which white simply took it, and now he's only down an exchange, and he continues to attack for very little material. If black takes on g7, there'll be check and rook to h3. Still checkmate is coming on h8. Inevitable. And if black does instead of that f6, trying to defend, then rook h3 is there, the threat being queen to h7 check, followed by g8 queen and another checkmate. And there are plenty of checkmates, plenty of interesting lines. Once more, if they take, we can make use of the open h file and checkmate with the rook. Or if they don't take, if they go king f7, plenty of interesting moves there will be here, but I like the simple g takes f6, which was given by Galkin in his analysis. And if knight c to e5, then this nice move, opening the road for the heavy pieces, and checkmating after queen to h7 check on king f6, dragging the king a bit further, so that pawn on f6 kind of lured the black king to take it and to come out in front of his pieces, staying defenseless and getting checkmated on h4. Finally, what happened in the game after f takes g7 was that black tried to block the position a bit with the move f5, but then e takes f5 was one way to win, rook h3 was another way. I just want to show you that at the end of the day, after some complications, black tried to create some threats, but he didn't have enough troops and enough air for his pieces to create threats. After the capture on g6 and knight g6, queen h7 with the threat rook to f3, and with the threat g8 queen checkmate. Rook g8, check, king e7, and queen g6. At the end of the day, when the smoke cleared, white was ahead. With material, he has 2 light pieces and a bunch of pawns and 2 pawns for rook, so he's technically winning. Actually, the best thing here is that he kept his brave soldiers on the king side. The pawns that have been advanced, the one on g5 survived. The one on g7 will be taken very soon, but nevertheless white is winning, and he won convincingly after some further moves. Took on c4, took on e7, and in this endgame it was a matter of technique. Guy can simply push the pawns and left no chances to his opponent. Those pawns became queens very, very soon. Bishop f6, rook g8, and after knight e2, rook takes c2, rook to f2, followed by knight g3. Black saw no way to defend against h6, h7, and h8, and resigned. To summarize, we want to advance the pawns against the enemy king, especially if we have castled on the different sides. Then the main question is who is faster. So we are trying to clear the road for our pieces from behind, the heavy pieces, the rooks and the bishops, eventually the queens. But even if we castle on the same side, we are still willing to advance and to push the pawns forward in order to clear the road for our pieces, to get rid of the defenders, and to use the pawns themselves as attacking tools, as monsters that are standing on the road of the opponent's pieces and don't give them a chance to defend in a good way. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.